He thought he'd won before the judge even called the room to order. I signed my name on the dotted line, and the pen didn't shake. No tears, no trembling voice, none of the things the room was braced to see. Across the aisle, my husband of 23 years was doing everything he could not to smile, and failing. He thought he'd just taken the house, the company, the lake property, every dollar we'd built together. He had no idea that in about 4 minutes, a folder his own lawyer hadn't seen coming was about to turn his victory into the most expensive mistake of his life. If you've ever had someone underestimate exactly what you're capable of, stay till the end. This one's for you. The courtroom smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, the way rooms do when they're built for endings. I wore a navy blazer I'd bought years ago for job interviews I never went to. My hands were folded in my lap the way my mother taught me. Across the room, Marcus Reyes sat in his good charcoal suit, checking his phone under the table, probably texting Brianna, probably telling her it was almost over. He was getting the house with the wraparound porch I'd picked the swatches for, back when picking swatches still felt like building a life and not decorating someone else's throne. He was getting Reyes Construction, the business I'd kept solvent through 2 recessions with spreadsheets he never once opened. He was getting the lake house, the investment accounts, the cars, every asset stitched together over 23 years of marriage. I was getting our twins, Noah and Chloe. Full custody. 17 years old, 6 months from leaving for college, 6 months from not needing full custody of anything at all. My attorney, Rachel Simmons, leaned toward me one last time before the judge took the bench. She'd been fighting me on this for 3 weeks straight, ever since I told her the plan. I could still hear the disbelief in her voice from that first phone call, 40 years of protecting clients' interests, and she couldn't understand why I was calmly handing mine away. Vanessa, she whispered now, pen hovering like she thought there was still time to stop this. You don't have to do this. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I said. And I meant it. She didn't understand yet. Neither did anyone else in that room, except maybe a man who drafted a document 17 years earlier and never lived to see how much it would matter. Judge Alvarez was in her 50s, reading glasses pushed low, the flat unimpressed tone of someone who'd seen every version of this room 1,000 times. She looked at me the way you look at someone standing a little too close to a ledge. Mrs. Reyes, I need to confirm you understand what you're agreeing to. You're relinquishing your claim to nearly every marital asset, the residence, the business, all investment accounts. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. You've had adequate counsel. Time to consider this? I have. And this is being entered into freely, without coercion? It is. Marcus shifted in his seat. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, just slightly, just enough. He thought he'd won a war without ever throwing a punch, that his wife of 23 years had simply run out of fight. His mother, Patricia, sat behind him in her Sunday pearls, and when our eyes met, she gave me the same smile she'd worn at every holiday dinner for 2 decades, the one that said she'd always known I wasn't good enough for her son. Marcus signed fast. Too fast, the way people sign things they've already spent in their heads 100 times. The judge nodded, satisfied, and reached for the next folder in the stack. I recognized it by its thickness. The weight of paper that had been sitting quietly in Rachel's briefcase since Tuesday. She opened it. Read the first page. Read it again. Marcus didn't notice, he was already halfway out of the room in his mind, composing a text to Brianna about dinner reservations. It was Patricia who noticed first, the small crease forming between her brows. I watched her smile falter for the first time in 17 years. The judge looked up. Not at me, at Marcus. Mr. Reyes. Are you aware of a document filed with this court under the name Sinclair Family Trust? His smile went out like a light in a house, seen from the outside. What? He said. I sat very still, hands folded, and felt something settle in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter. Something closer to peace. But to understand why I gave away everything I built, why I sat in that courtroom and let my husband believe he'd won. You have to go back. Not to that morning. Not even to that year. Nearly 3 years earlier, to a letter from a bank I was never supposed to see, and a promise my grandfather made me long before I understood what it would cost, or what it would save. People always ask how a marriage travels from the beginning to the end, like there's one door you could point to that's slammed shut. There isn't. There's a long hallway of small doors, closing one after another, so quietly you don't notice until you turn around and realize you're standing in the dark. I met Marcus Reyes when I was 24, fresh off my CPA license, working 60-hour weeks at a mid-sized firm downtown. He was 26, driving a pickup with a cracked windshield, handing out business cards he'd printed himself at a copy shop, Reyes Construction, reliable work, fair prices. 2 employees, both cousins, a cement mixer he was still paying off. Dust on his boots. A way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room. I fell for that look before I fell for anything else about him. We married 18 months later, folding chairs, string lights, my parents' backyard. Within a year I was doing his books at the kitchen table after my own shift ended. I built his invoicing system. I filed his contractor's license renewal 3 years running because he kept missing the deadline. I negotiated his first line of credit, walking into a bank with a binder of projections I'd built myself, while a loan officer kept glancing past me to Marcus like the real answers had to come from him. Marcus understood concrete and framing and how to read a room full of subcontractors. That mattered, I never denied it mattered. But a company doesn't survive on framing alone. It survives on whoever's keeping the lights on when a client is 60 days late, whoever manages payroll through a slow winter, whoever says no to the truck he wants before the numbers can support it. That was me. Nearly a decade, unpaid, unlisted, unnamed on anything but the tax returns. Then the twins came. I remember holding Noah in one arm and Chloe in the other, exhausted in a way I didn't know a body could survive, while Marcus stood in the doorway on his phone, already talking timelines with a supplier. I told myself that was just who he was, a man who couldn't sit still. I went home. I nursed 2 babies through the night, and slowly, without ever deciding to, I stopped going into the office. The company grew without my hands on it, because by then Marcus had hired an actual bookkeeper. A woman who called him visionary in emails I sometimes saw over his shoulder. He started getting written up in the regional business journal. Reyes Construction, founder turns family business into regional powerhouse. I read that article at the kitchen counter with baby food on my sleeve. 4 columns of print. My name wasn't in one of them. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers. He came home later, always with a reason. He started making decisions about money without telling me, decisions I only found out about when the statements arrived. He opened accounts I didn't know existed. He stopped asking what I thought. Patricia never helped. Sunday dinners, swirling wine in her glass, my son built all of this himself. Like I was the help who'd wandered too close to the good china. I never corrected her. I told myself the truth didn't need an audience to still be true. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was sorting mail at the kitchen island, bills, school flyers, when I found an envelope from a bank I didn't recognize, addressed to Marcus, marked personal and confidential in red ink. I almost set it aside. I opened it instead. It wasn't from a bank at all. It was a confirmation notice from a private wealth firm in Boston, referencing an account restructuring that had already been completed. Marcus had moved significant money into a series of holding entities I'd never heard of, LLCs with names like Ashcroft Holdings and Belmore Capital Partners, entities that existed, as far as I could tell, purely to separate assets from the marriage. Long before divorce had ever been mentioned. I didn't confront him that night. I called an old colleague instead, a forensic auditor named Maya, who owed me a favor, and asked her, hypothetically, what it means when a business owner starts restructuring assets without his wife's knowledge. It means, Maya said, he's either protecting himself from a lawsuit, or from you. I already knew which one. Over the following weeks I pulled at threads quietly, the way I used to trace discrepancies in a ledger, never announcing what I was looking for, just following the numbers until they told the truth. Marcus had started the process 18 months earlier, right around when Patricia had begun introducing him at parties as practically a free man, now that the kids are almost grown. He'd been seeing a woman named Brianna from his supplier's sales team for nearly a year. No proof yet, just the feeling a wife develops when she stops being asked where she wants to go for dinner. I sat with the betrayal longer than I want to admit. Nights crying in the bathroom with the fan running so the kids wouldn't hear. Nights lying awake calculating instead, the accountant in me refusing to let the wife in me fall apart completely. That's when I remembered my grandfather. Walter Sinclair was a quiet man. A retired attorney who spent his last 15 years fishing on a lake in Michigan, reading paperback westerns on his porch. He died when I was 28, newly married, still believing wholeheartedly in the life I was building. He left me a trust, modest at the time, some stock, a small parcel of land, structured as what his own attorney called an irrevocable trust. I remembered signing the paperwork half distracted, a phone call from Marcus about a supplier issue pulling my attention. I remembered my grandfather squeezing my hand afterward. This isn't for the good years, Vanessa. This is for if the bad ones come. I hadn't looked at that paperwork in over a decade. I found it in a fireproof box in the attic, under old tax returns and the twins' baby books, 41 dense pages I hadn't read since I was studying estate law for an exam. I called Maya again, and on her recommendation, an estate attorney named Rachel Simmons, silver hair, a reputation for being unshakable. Rachel read the trust for nearly 2 hours while I sat across from her, watching her expression shift from professional neutrality into something sharper. Do you understand what your grandfather built for you? I said I understood the basics: stock, some land, a modest inheritance. It's grown substantially, she said. And it's structured to activate fully, distributing its entire holdings to you, the moment you cease to hold a majority interest in marital assets. He built you a contingency, Vanessa. He built it assuming a day might come when you had nothing left in your own name. I sat very still. Except this time it wasn't grief keeping me quiet. It was the ground shifting firmly back beneath my feet. Marcus had spent 18 months making sure I'd leave the marriage with nothing. He had no idea that leaving with nothing was about to make me wealthier than he'd ever imagined possible. Rachel didn't like it. You could fight for half of everything, she told me. The house, the business valuation, the accounts. Given what he's done, moving assets without disclosure, a judge wouldn't look kindly on him. You could walk away with millions and keep the trust untouched. Why give up a fight you're likely to win? On paper, it made no sense. I could have hired a forensic accountant, dragged the affair into discovery, spent 2 years bleeding him in litigation the way he'd apparently been prepared to bleed me. But I didn't want his money. I wanted something he couldn't calculate, couldn't see coming, couldn't build a defense against, because he wouldn't even know it existed until it was already his loss. I know this looks like I'm losing my mind, I told Rachel. But I need you to trust me the way I trust what my grandfather built. It took 3 meetings. She filed the trust notice sealed and separate from the general settlement, exactly as the law allowed, ready to be introduced only once Marcus's signature was already dry on paper he couldn't take back. At home, I told no one. Not my sister, not my closest friend from church. Not even Noah and Chloe, though they sensed something was wrong long before I explained anything. Marcus, meanwhile, had never been happier. He moved into a downtown rental he called temporary, to Patricia, though the temporary apartment had art on the walls within 2 weeks. He started showing up at the twins' basketball games with Brianna a few steps behind him, her hand looped through his arm like she'd already measured the drapes for our old living room. He bought a truck he didn't need, just because for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running the numbers past me first. Patricia took me to lunch once, ostensibly about the kids' college plans, though I understood within 10 minutes it was really an audition for her role as the reasonable mother-in-law. Marcus built that company from nothing, she reminded me, stirring sweetener into her iced tea. It wouldn't be fair to tear it apart in court. I'm sure you understand. I do understand, I told her. More than you know. The hardest part was never Marcus or Patricia. It was Chloe finding me in the kitchen one night, lease documents spread across the counter, asking the question she'd clearly been holding for weeks. Mom, why aren't you fighting? Everyone knows what he did. Sometimes winning doesn't look like fighting, Chloe, I told her. Sometimes it looks like letting someone believe they've already won. She didn't understand. I didn't expect her to. Not yet. By the time the court date arrived, Marcus had already picked out a ring for Brianna, according to a cousin who still spoke to me out of old loyalty. He walked into that courtroom like a man arriving at a party thrown in his honor. He had no idea what the rest of his life was about to look like. His attorney, a sharp young man named Derek Hayes who billed by the hour and had been told this would be a quick, uncontested hearing, sat relaxed beside him, glancing at his watch. Judge Alvarez moved through the settlement with brisk efficiency, until she reached the folder Rachel had filed separately. I watched her posture change the way shoulders square when a routine task becomes something else entirely. Mr. Reyes. Are you aware of a document filed with this court under the name Sinclair Family Trust? Marcus's face did something I'd never seen in 23 years of marriage. Blank. Then confused. Then, unmistakably, afraid. What? He said again, looking to Derek, who was already flipping through his own copy with rising alarm. Rachel stood, calm as still water. Your Honor, this trust was established by Mrs. Reyes's late grandfather over 17 years ago. It's irrevocable, fully documented, entirely separate from marital property. Under both federal and state law, its assets are excluded from the marital estate. We filed formal notice with this court. Though not with opposing counsel, as it wasn't required, since Mrs. Reyes wasn't seeking any claim against it. Derek was reading faster now, composure cracking. Your Honor, if this trust is being activated by today's settlement, we need time to review. The trust's activation clause, Rachel continued, was triggered the moment Mrs. Reyes relinquished her interest in the marital assets, precisely as she's done of her own free will, as this court confirmed minutes ago. There is nothing to review, Counselor. The judge turned back to Marcus. Mr. Reyes. Were you aware, prior to signing today's settlement, of the existence or terms of this trust? No, he said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I had no idea. Did anyone conceal this from you? Was it withheld during discovery? No, Your Honor, Rachel answered first. This trust was never part of Mrs. Reyes's disclosed marital assets, because it is not, and has never been, a marital asset. Mr. Reyes was under no obligation to inquire about property belonging separately to his wife, and Mrs. Reyes was under no obligation to volunteer information about assets outside the scope of these proceedings. The judge looked between us. This settlement was entered freely, by both parties, with full legal counsel. I see no evidence of fraud regarding the marital estate itself. The Sinclair Trust is a separate legal matter, outside my jurisdiction here. She looked at Marcus, not unkindly. Mr. Reyes, I understand this is a surprise. But surprise is not the same as deception. You signed this agreement with full knowledge of what you were receiving. Mrs. Reyes is not required to explain what she already owned. Something collapsed behind his eyes, the particular collapse of a man realizing, in real time, that the story he'd told himself for months was never the story that had actually been happening. He stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. This isn't right, he said, hands braced on the table. She hid this from me. She let me sign without telling me what she had. Mr. Reyes, I'd advise you to sit down and consult your attorney before saying anything further. He didn't sit. He turned to me instead, composure gone, replaced by the raw disbelief of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. You knew, he said. This whole time, you knew. And you let me think I was winning. I looked at the man I'd spent 23 years building a life with. The boots and cracked windshield boy who used to fall asleep with his head on my stomach, now standing in an $800 suit, accusing me of a crime I hadn't committed. I never lied to you, Marcus, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You asked for everything. I gave you everything you asked for. He hired a new attorney within the week. Someone known for aggressive appeals, determined to get the settlement thrown out. But Rachel had built the agreement too carefully for that door to open. Every signature witnessed, every disclosure legally sound, every asset exactly what Marcus had demanded in mediation. The trust wasn't hidden through deception. It simply had never been his to ask about, and ignorance, however bitter, was never going to unwind a settlement he'd entered with his eyes wide open. The ruling came 6 weeks later. Motion denied. Marcus Reyes was not defrauded. He had simply never asked the right questions of a wife he'd stopped seeing as anything more than the woman who kept his books and raised his kids. Patricia came to see me once, near the end of it, standing on my new porch in her Sunday pearls, composure thinner than I'd ever seen it. You could have warned him, she said. Not quite an accusation. Not quite anything else. He made a fool of himself the day he stopped asking what I knew, I told her. For the first time in 17 years, Patricia Reyes had nothing to say to me at all. The truth I only fully understood in the weeks that followed. Marcus had never built an empire alone. He'd built a good, profitable, respected business, but a business isn't a fortune, not in the way that matters. A fortune is what survives you, what compounds quietly in the background while you're busy convincing yourself and everyone else that you did it all with your own 2 hands. My grandfather understood that decades before I did. Marcus kept the house, the company, the lake property, every asset he'd fought so hard to claim. On paper, he won everything he asked for. But I watched, in the months that followed, as the cost of that victory revealed itself the way costs often do. Brianna didn't stay once she understood there was no windfall coming, once she saw the mortgage on the lake house he'd bragged about, and a business that, without my quiet management behind it for 2 decades, was already showing cracks a hired bookkeeper hadn't caught in time. I left the courthouse that afternoon without looking back. Noah and Chloe were waiting in the car. Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand without saying a word, like she'd finally understood something she hadn't a few weeks earlier. Marcus still has everything he fought so hard to keep. I never wanted any of it back. There's a particular freedom in walking away from a life you built with your hands and letting someone else keep the walls, because walls were never what I was fighting for. The trust began distributing almost immediately, exactly as my grandfather designed it nearly 2 decades earlier. I didn't buy anything extravagant. I found a small house 2 streets back from the beach, an hour from where the twins grew up, close enough for weekends home, far enough to feel like starting over instead of just moving down the block from my old life. Noah and Chloe both got into good colleges this spring. Chloe wants to study finance. Which made me laugh the first time she told me, standing in my new kitchen with her acceptance letter in hand, though I don't think she understood why until I told her more about her great-grandfather, and the trust he built for a granddaughter he never lived to see needed. Marcus called one evening in July, about something other than logistics. I could hear it in his voice before he said it. You could have told me, he said. About the trust. Before any of this happened. I stood on my porch, watching the last light fade over water I couldn't quite see but could always hear. You never asked, I said. A long pause. So this was revenge, he said. Not quite a question. No, I told him, and meant it more than I think he'll ever understand. I didn't do any of this to hurt you, Marcus. I simply stopped protecting you from your own greed. What happened after that was never mine to control. He didn't have a response for that. People ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder, not taking half of everything I helped build over 23 years. I tell them the truth, I didn't lose that fight. I chose a different one. There's a version of strength that looks like clenched fists and courtroom battles. And there's another version that looks like quietly signing your name, walking out the door, and trusting that the things worth having were never the things anyone could take from you in the first place. My grandfather understood that. It took me most of my adult life to understand it too. If you're sitting somewhere right now feeling like you've lost everything to someone who never truly saw what you were worth, I want you to hear this. sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for what's yours. It's trusting that what's truly yours was never something they could take. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because there's a lot more where this came from.